like to call to order the General Government Standing Committee at 1:33 appears. And we're going to go immediately to our action items, and 2A on the agenda is discussion and possible direction regarding the development of Mendocino County's 2019 legislative platform. And I would like to say that both Supervisor Jurdy and myself are here, so we are ready to go. Do you want to start off then with the presentation, and then I have a lot of input?
Yeah. Sarah DeKett, Deputy CEO, Mendocino County Executive Office. So we've worked on revising portions of our legislative platform, and so you have a red line. So I'm going to go over the red line changes, also point out a few corrections for typos and things that we're changing. And then we also have a list of recommendations from our Cannabis State Requirements Working Group. So I'm going to go through the changes in the platform, and then from there move over to the list of recommendations from the working group. And we have at least one member present from the working group that helped us with these recommendations. So the first change is on page 6, a part of the regulatory mandates and reform section. And this one comes from our disaster recovery team. And it's the establishment of fuel breaks around and near communities and waiving the CEQA provisions to create these fuel breaks. And you'll see that it's in this section as well as our disaster recovery because we feel it's very important to make sure that we're able to move forward on these projects and not be slowed down by CEQA before our next fire season. The next change is on page 7, and it's in the transportation section. Remove the portion regarding Proposition 69, which was last June's election. I've also changed the second bullet point around SB1. We were able to work with our association and help a part of the effort of to defeat the proposition on the November ballot to repeal it, but we wanted to make sure we kept this language in case there's another ballot initiative moving forward or something to kind of modify the transportation funding from SB1. The last one, there is a typo in infrastructure, which we corrected, and we added additional funding for rural airport projects. So our Department of Transportation also manages a number of small airports, and we want to make sure that we're advocating for federal funding to make improvements to these airports. On the next set of changes is on page 8 in the water section. So the State Water Board, in particular across the state, issued an order, and it's called the Trash Amendment. And it's a provision that goes far and above what's required by the EPA. And that Trash Amendment states that starting with our new permit, which will probably come on board in 2020, the county has 10 years to be full trash capture, which means for Mendocino, we're going to have to install 44 trash devices in our storm drains in the Ukiah and Fort Bragg area. So part of it is advocating for additional funding, but also supporting the determination that the trash amendment's an unfunded mandate. So there's some pending litigation. Now, it may take many, many years, and so until that's made, we're going to continue on with meeting our state benchmarks and staying compliant. And tracking our costs should at some point it be considered an unfunded mandate and we could potentially get reimbursed. So we added in those two things around the trash amendment. That's all of the changes for water. And then the next changes are regarding cannabis on page 9. And I'll go over our minor changes, and at the end we'll come back to the State Requirements Working Group. We did remove a section about cannabis events, which was addressed in the 2018 legislative session. We also added a statement regarding changes to the definition of premise, which can be quite problematic with our cultivators and facilities moving forward with state licenses. And the last line should read businesses, not just business, so we made that change as well. Another one we added was really supporting streamlining of state ancillary permits and licenses. So many of our cannabis businesses have to go to California Department of Fish and Wildlife or the State Water Board to receive some type of permit or license. And we really want to make sure that that's streamlined and efficient, because a lot of times that can slow down the process of them getting an annual license. Another one is supporting the use of state provisional licenses. We do have that for 2019, but we are concerned that based on timing of when Tempsons expire and people go into provisional, there may be a need to overlap provisionals into 2019 and so we put that on there, and that's something that RCRC and CSAC is monitoring, whether we need to push forward with another year of provisional. So those are our minor changes to the cannabis section. For disaster recovery, the first bullet point is actually not supposed to be redlined. We are keeping that in, and that's backfill the loss of property taxes. And I wanted to let you guys know that we are working with our lobbyist, Paul Yoder, and our auditor controller's office to put together what that tax loss would be for this year and submit it to them. And hopefully we can work with the new administration of getting backfilled included in the proposed budget that comes out in January. The next one is also including in that backfill school districts at their assessed value, and then again, the establishment of fuel breaks around communities and CEQA exemptions. We did remove some items that we've already received funding for, and that was for the Water District project in Redwood Valley, and local projects with Fish and Wildlife and the Water Board. There's also a typo we fixed. It should be change state law on rolling blackouts.
Instead of brownouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a couple new additions from our recovery team, and that's funding emergency planning around seniors and those that are disabled, funding projects to address ingress and regress and secondary emergency access, funding upgrades to community town halls that act as the community gathering place, and fund CAL FIRE to maintain fire breaks. So those are all new additions. And I wanted to make one comment. It's not included, but it recently came to my attention and like direction of this if you're interested in adding this to the platform. So last Wednesday, the Building Standards Commission approved moving forward with a new requirement that every single new home that's built 2020 and beyond has to include solar as well as energy efficient standards. One thing that we're a little bit nervous about is that cost can be anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000, and we're worried this may be another barrier to entry for those that are rebuilding their homes in our area as well as in Butte County, since the cost is escalating with different upgrades, and a lot of them are underinsured or not insured. So one thing I'd like to propose adding is a bullet point to delay this requirement from 2020 to 2023 for disaster survivors and look at state funding directly towards people that are disaster survivors that want to move forward with this requirement. And really that's around how can we lower the cost for, these over 20,000 homes that are going to be in the rebuilding process over the next few years.
Yeah. And I knew about the solar. I do believe there is something, but I'm not quite sure, but I think that should be added.
Yeah, I support that. And I know Sonoma Clean Power and Peach Need are giving grants for people who are affected by the Mendocino complex fire, $7,000 if they exceed the energy standards by, I think, 20%. So that one way of doing that would be solar PV. So something like that on a statewide level would be really helpful.
Yeah. Then we'll go ahead and add in that portion as well.
Just before we go too much farther, so while we're on page 12.
I have a whole bunch.
Oh,
of
are we going to go back?
Do you want us?
Why don't you just go?
We can go
through it?
category by category.
Well, why don't you go through it and then
Okay, come back.
We'll come back?
Is that okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay. The next set of changes is around economic and community development on 13. And there is a bullet point, and there's to support the repeal of Article 34 of the California Constitution, which will reduce administrative burden on local governments around affordable housing and development. This has been an issue that's come up with CSAC, and it's this voter initiative that was passed in 1950. And essentially, it states that no city, town, or county may develop, construct, or acquire any low-rent housing unless approved by a majority of qualified electors of the city, town, or county at the ballot box. And one of the concerns that's coming up with the new initiative to build housing is this is an extra barrier for counties and cities to address affordable housing. And that's been a hot topic at CSAC around how can we make it easier for us to actually make movement on that. So I included this provision, and that's out of this last CSAC annual conference this month.
And I appreciate you explaining that.
And the second one is also related to that, which is advocate for the expansion of state and federal tax credits to better meet the statewide need for subsidized affordable housing units. And then the next change is on 15 under public safety, and it should be infrastructure at the end right there. And it's advocate for local funding for disaster preparedness and emergency services infrastructure. So this could be like microwave or different types of systems that are important in our 911, and making sure we can get as much funding as possible. The next change is on page 16, and it's in the environment and public health section. So one of the big topics is, of course, around in-home supportive services, and the cost is going to increase. The county local share costs will continue to rise and increase. So this year in January, the recommendations will be given to the legislature around IHHS, and an opportunity to potentially amend the MOE will happen in 2019. And this is really to support the reduction of IHSS local cost share within the maintenance of effort, and there is an extra E in there. So we want to make sure that we advocate for this, because it is one of those programs where the costs are increasing because of state and federal mandates, not anything the county has control over. So there was talk at CSAC about advocating for this year and what kind of things could happen, maybe reduced cost share or swapping programs. So we wanted to make sure that's on there. And the second one is around the LAO recently put out a study regarding 1991 and 2011 realignment about how the ratios really should be adjusted because the costs increase are federal and state costs, and the county doesn't have control over that. So advocate for the allocation of additional realignment revenues. Current cost-sharing ratios no longer reflect county's long-term ability to control costs in the programs. And those are the changes we've put in so far. And so I can either move over to the cannabis ones, or we can start with your current changes.
I would like to go over this document first.
Sure.
And page for page, so don't let me forget when you want yours. But I look at page 5, and down at the bottom, it'd be protect local government revenues from state taking and borrowing. Shouldn't we put and federal?
Yeah.
And then going on to page 6, and I saw it elsewhere about the Cal Enviro screen, and so maybe this isn't the appropriate place, but I put revised definition of that for disadvantaged communities, which we all know. There's 21 counties within the state that couldn't take advantage of a lot of that funding with the cap and trade based on some of their definitions and the way that they read it. So I saw it later in the document, and so I think it's covered.
And we can always add language in both places, since it does kind of cross over between that section, what I think is an environmental section, and local control.
And part of the reason we don't get a lot of the funding is because we have good air quality, except when we have fires. Like, you know, the rest of the state has San Joaquin Valley has real issues. So we're always disadvantaged to receive funds. And then I put in this section, maybe you can help me, but with the fires and everything, legislation on insurance coverage, and also you had the brownouts, blackouts. I think we need to add some language to advocate for reasonable, what would you say, regulations or legislation. So that might go later as well.
On that point.
Okay.
So at the Sonoma Clean Power meeting on Thursday of last week, Supervisor Hopkins from Sonoma County mentioned that there was only one weather sensor, I guess you might call it, in West Sonoma County that PG&E uses in order to determine whether or not to have the rolling blackouts, and as a preventative measure. And in San Diego County, I'm not sure who the provider is down there, but the other provider down in San Diego County had like 100 of those sensors throughout San Diego County. And her point was there needed to be more of these sensors. So I don't know. We might have, maybe we're relying on the one in West Sonoma for Mendocino County. I don't know what PG&E uses in Mendocino County, but the point was if you had more microclimate sensors, you could more precisely gauge where to shut down the system and still be safe.
Right, and with the Faro project, Janet Polly and I have helped locations for private property with weather stations throughout the upper Russian River watershed. And so I don't know if PG&E has access to that or not, because that's a scientific study. But we have quite a few of them in, and so I'm glad you brought that up, that Supervisor Hopkins talked about, because she and I've talked about it. And so these weather stations, I've got to find out from the scientific team if they can do the same thing. And I was just going to say, when Sonoma County got their wind, got their blackouts, we didn't. So maybe they do have access.
Okay.
Yeah, but just not sure. But yeah, it's important that that be considered. Okay, moving on to page 7. It is under summary, but you go down, and the sentence is awkward. And aggregate, cement and oil, need for roads and bridges. It's either impact materials needed or material needs for roads and bridges. Just awkward.
That was the second to last sentence? It starts with the
No.
Mendocino County supports?
It's right in the middle, summary, right in the middle.
Uh-huh.
And
Is it the sentence start with furthermore? Is that the sentence?
It starts with aggregate. That's the sentence with furthermore. Yes.
Okay.
That
Okay.
needs to be cleared up. And then the very last sentence. I think will needs to be relocated behind which in the second to the last line. And strike the S on provides. So it would read, which will provide counties and cities funding for maintenance. Because as it reads now is which provides counties and cities will funding for maintenance. So it just needs to be fixed.
Okay.
Okay, and then you said that it's support Proposition 69. Okay, but right below that says oppose SB 1 repeal efforts. Well, you've used repeal twice. One of them, I think under SB 1 repeal is correct, but for the second repeal in the same sentence, probably should be revoke or rescind.
Okay.
And then going down a little bit further, says support funding opportunities for restoration of rail infrastructure from Windsor to Willits. I'd like to strike out and in the Humboldt Bay area and just put a period behind Willits.
Okay.
And then the next one, support legislation and funding mechanisms. And it's support again. So the second support in that line could be sustains or maintains. Then some of the bullets just need cleanup too, but you'll probably do that for the final one.
Yeah, the red line kind of throws off
Yeah.
some of the.
So going to 8, you go down to support pursuing available grant funding, but it's a Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. You just have the wrong word. It'd be right under Proposition 1, water bond,
Ah.
that bullet. Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
Okay.
And going further down, advocate for locally beneficial legislation. It says 2018, it should be 2019. And the next bullet, the very last line, IWPC, of which Mendocino County is a member, it probably should be Mendocino County Water Agency. And then top of page 9, engage in the operating relicensing process. I think you would strike the operating, the relicensing process, but I think we really need a new statement to reflect the current situation
Okay.
where PG&E is looking to transfer or to sell, well, actually, they call it auction the project. And IWPC is engaged, so I don't know how you would wordsmith it, but I think we need something else said there to bring us up to date to the current process.
Would you just say engage in the relicensing and auctioning process?
Yes, that would work. And then I need an explanation.
Sure.
Going to page 11. And it's expedite payments for county-provided services, blah, 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 blah. But the line right below there, it says true ups. What's true ups?
Can you, what,
Okay, it's the second bullet
Midway.
point.
aha.
In parentheses, and allowing for eventual true ups. What's that?
So I believe when the process when we're talking with reimbursements for FEMA, so you submit your information, and there, it goes through a pretty long long review process. So there'll be times. I mean, it takes many years to close that process. So there may be times where we have to correct certain information, or there may be certain costs that weren't fully included in it. So you oftentimes submit your documentation pretty early on in the process. So it's really true ups and allowing us to provide more information as we go down the line if we have more information.
Okay, but
to
that's a
seek reimbursement.
terminology word, true ups? Okay. And then I didn't see anything in that particular area, but it recently has come up with the newest fires in 2018. And in the case of Mendocino County, we opened a shelter, and most of the people in the shelter were from Lake County. But we weren't declared in the federal declaration, so we get no refund, so to speak, of the costs of the cost to us for having that shelter. And I've also heard of this happen over with the Camp Fire, where counties, the way people evacuated, other counties had to open shelters, just from the sheer population, but also because of the routes and where people went. And those counties have had, like Glenn, have had to close up because they're not being reimbursed for their costs. So that, something, reimbursement for counties that provide emergency shelters to assist neighboring counties. I don't know if that's a possibility or something we even want to put in, but
Yeah, we could put something in about shelter reimbursements, essentially for counties providing emergency mutual aid.
that's a good one.
And we can specifically call out state and federal. So shelter reimbursement from the state and federal government for counties providing emergency mutual aid.
Okay. And then on page 12, the very top bullet. So explain that one to me.
That I am not an expert on, so we can maybe see if Darcy or Schwinn is available to come in. But all of these bullet points were put together by our disaster recovery team. So
Okay.
Nash Gonzalez, Darcy Antle.
Okay. So if you have more than 2 trailers, it deems you a trailer park in state law. So I was curious.
We'll get one. We'll see if one of them can come in.
Just before we leave page 12, so on that point, my understanding is that the state is looking at the building code because of the interest in tiny homes, and that right now they're considered RVs or mobile home park type facilities, and maybe they're not either. Maybe they're not because right now I think you have to put them on a permanent concrete foundation. You can't put them leave them on wheels, and so. But I thought we were just sort of waiting for the state to develop that revision to the building code, which is slightly different than this, I think. This may have to do with something else. But on page 12, the issue I wanted to raise was near the bottom where it says fund emergency planning. Fund planning projects to address ingress, regress, and secondary emergency access. I think actually what we would like is we would fund the planning and implementation of projects to address the ingress and regress and secondary emergency access. I don't think we want just a planning grant and then we have no money to implement it.
True. Good point.
So did you catch
Yes,
that?
plan and implementation.
Yeah.
If I may, through the chair, Nash Gonzalez. There's a bullet item that says amend the Mobile Home Park Act so that when 2 or more spaces are being held out for rent or lease does not automatically convert the property into a mobile home park. Technically, you can have 2 mobile homes on a piece of property, and it could be considered a mobile home park by the Department of Housing and Community Development. By amending the law, in essence, you would avoid going through that process of being called a mobile home park, so it wouldn't be subject to establishing a use permit for the mobile home park and then having to go through the HCD process. Again, this is all part of trying to assist folks who want to put 2 mobile homes on a site.
Okay.
So Nash, can you clarify, when you say mobile homes, are these on wheels and not on a perimeter foundation?
They could be on either, but if primarily it's associated with mobile homes that are on, I'll call it on an axle, because once they go to permanent foundation, they're picked up as real property, and they could fall under a primary unit and a secondary unit. But when they're on axles, they're considered a trailer coach, and therefore they could very well be considered a mobile home for mobile home park purposes.
Okay, I was just confused by that, so I appreciate the explanation.
You're welcome.
Yes.
That's it.
So then on page 13, at the very bottom of the page, we have some bold that just needs to be taken off. And then on 14, support the restoration of Williamson Act, the California Land Conservation Act, subvention. Shouldn't we add funds to that?
The first bullet point?
Yeah. I mean, right after subvention, add funds. Subvention funds. And then on 16, the maintenance of effort, I caught the E2. But shouldn't we capitalize that? The M and the E? So we know what the acronym stands for. And that's it from me.
And I just wanted to note, Sarah Duquette, Mendocino County, that I have been working with the HC director, Tammy Moss Chandler, and there may be some additional language coming when it goes before the board to maybe add a little bit more detail here and there. So I wanted you to be prepared that we may have a few more things as, you know, the end of the year and we gear up for the next legislative session.
That's perfect. Supervisor Jordan?
Yeah, one final thing on 16, when it's the in-home support services. I was talking to someone who was hiring people through the in-home support services program, take care of a family member that had some sort of dementia. And, you know, they kept cycling through people because there are only so many people who are willing and able to work at that salary. And what I guess I wasn't clear on this, are they able to pay that person more than, you know, than the allotted amount? So if the salary was X, can they, through the program, can they pay the person X, but then pay them an extra $2, $3 an hour in order to get the person they want? Because if not, it seems like that would be an advantage in changing the program so that they could hire the person that they need for that job.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chair Brown, Supervisor Jordy, it is my understanding that you cannot, because of the integrity of their program, that you cannot pay over the salary, the assigned salary. We could certainly look into that, but I believe the answer to that is no.
Now, I also think that they're only given so many hours, and I know families that have tried to add to those hours by paying them separately, and mainly people that qualify for IHSS usually haven't the funds to pay anybody. And many times it's a family member.
Sarah Duquette, Executive Office. Like CEO Angelo said, I believe the wages are tied to some, pretty much it's negotiated. And then you have the maintenance of effort. So I don't believe that that's feasible,
It's
though.
not negotiated what you pay the worker, but it's negotiated, I think, with the state and the funding we receive.
I'm just wondering if we're advocating for changes, if we
And
wanted,
hourly.
if we wanted to advocate to allow people to pay something above and beyond the program salary, so that they could hire and retain the person that they want.
What I would recommend advocating for is the state completely take this program and we no longer pay for it, because most of these increased costs, again, I mean, it would be great if we could pay them more per hourly wage, but there's a lot of these costs that keep escalating, and it's spiraling to become a bigger beast to the point where we can't afford the program. And that's really coming up in the next few years because the costs are escalating. So one of the interesting things that came out of the LAO report is either giving the counties more money or giving this program back to the state in exchange for something else that has costs that we can control. So essentially, this program's going to grow, and we're on the hook for it, not the state. So I think if we have to do one push, and I think all the counties are doing it, is see if we can unload this program. Because,
I think the state did do a pilot project with some counties, didn't they? That, where they did pay the cost. And I remember going back over the hourly wage, and I think Mendocino County, it was the highest throughout the state.
Yeah, we actually offer a really good rate for IHSS. The IHSS is still in the works. There's still negotiations at the state level. So, you know, there's more, but I think your point is a good point. I don't know what you would write in the platform, because right now I believe it is essentially illegal to do that. So I think there have to be some way to finesse the language.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking of what if we said something to the fact that the program should have flexibility for, I don't know, the client so that the client had the legal right to supplement the pay of the IHSS worker if the need and ability to pay was there. So I realize not every client has the money, but it's also possible that not every client needs to pay more in order to get someone for that job. There could be, I think there have to be situations where it's a more challenging job because of the client. And so it just seems like the program should have more flexibility if that flexibility isn't already there.
I just know that you have to really, really be careful so that the client is not thrown out of the program because of the regulations that surround it. But I understand, but just, yeah. And what they may have in savings or may not have. That it's one of those where you just have to really be careful because you want to protect the client. And I truly understand maybe it'd be a family member that talks to that person privately and hires them on a weekend instead of the work days,
I can draft that. I took some notes and put it in, and I can also email that over to our HSA director. She will have more details on whether that's feasible, and we can bring that back on when we come to adopt.
That would be good, because I truly understand what Supervisor Jurdy is saying. When you have someone good and you want to keep them and they're doing, an exceptional job. Sure understand it.
Was there any other changes, or should we move on to the working group's recommendation?
Let's move on to the revised legislative platform recommendation from our working group, and this is under the cannabis section. So would you like to go forward, please?
Yes. So the State Requirements Working Group originally drafted the list at their November meeting, and then last Thursday we further refined it with the group. So just go point by point. The first one is support specific cannabis regulatory provisions for rural communities to address regional needs and challenges of small farmers. The second one is support self-distribution license for small cultivators in rural areas. Advocate for generator regulations that address the needs of rural counties and small farmers, and this is an issue that's come up locally as well with our ordinances. Yeah. Water use considerations that are appropriate for rural communities and small farmers that incentivize conservation and regulate cannabis at the same level as standard agriculture. Advocate for the removal of the 4-acre cap on cannabis cooperative associations to allow economy of scale for small farmers. And just a little refresher is they had the 1-acre cap, which wasn't enforced. So essentially, large-scale cultivators can stack, and you can have massive grows. And here there's a lot of will for kind of a cooperative model where you're having multiple permittees kind of come together, and to remove their cap. Right now they're capped at 4 acres, and that will allow more co-op style cultivation in Mendocino County. The next one is support cottage level micro business opportunities and licenses that are streamlined for small rural farmers. Support expanded opportunities for direct sales. Support the continued development of cannabis business tourism, including funding and incentive programs. Support expanding the types of cannabis licenses allowed to participate at cannabis events. Develop cannabis cottage level licenses allowing home-based businesses to enter the cannabis industry. Advocate for a state recognized cannabis baking system. Advocate for stronger enforcement of illegal cannabis operations. Support a state ombudsman program with the Department of Consumer Affairs to address complaints regarding cannabis business-to-business practices between licenses
Sarah,
or licensees.
Excuse me. I don't know if you want your page to match what you're saying. But maybe for the purpose of the public, it might be good. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't look to see it hadn't been changed. I'm on my hard copy.
Support changes to the cottage outdoor cultivation license to allow 25 plants or 2,500 square feet. Support expanding co-location / shared facility licensing model for cannabis processing. This is something we're seeing right now, but with just manufacturing. Advocate for flexible and reduced/streamlined regulations for small farmers cultivating less than 10,000 square feet. Advocate for workforce training funding for displaced cannabis businesses/workers that are unable to transition to the new commercial industry. And then the last one kind of touches on some public comments from the previous board meeting. Support statewide ban on all forms of genetic modification slash manipulation, regardless of its GMO status. And those are the ones out of the group. So based on your direction, we can add this to the cannabis section, or if you want to add some of them, but it's before you for consideration to include in the ledge platform.
So
I believe we have at least one person here from the working group that may want to make some comments.
So I have a question. So there are a handful of working groups, and I'm not under the impression that there are county staff people necessarily at the working group meetings. And I guess here's a series of proposals. What do the relevant county departments think of these, for example?
So county staff is actually at all working group meetings. And so particularly at the state requirements, it's myself, and I was there when we did this, as well as a representative from planning and building and a representative from the agriculture department. So we were all present in the crafting of it. And most of these recommendations are really around reducing regulations and making changes to help the smaller farmers, so less than 10,000 square feet and smaller operations, succeed in the marketplace. And like I said, the last one, this is in response of some recent things that have been happening, which you've heard at the board meetings. But I think overall it was a pretty collaborative process, and there wasn't any major issues from any staffers during this that we were massively opposed to anything. So there's no issue from from staff on these recommendations.
Okay, then one follow-up. Could you maybe go into a little more on the bullet point, advocate the removal of the 4-acre cap on cannabis cooperative associations? So this, I'm assuming, doesn't refer to any one particular parcel. This is just an association of property owners who are working together under a cooperative. So
licensees that are working together under a cooperative model.
So where does the 4 acres come into play if it's not pertinent to any one parcel? So
the co-op or the co-op association could have a number of licenses that are part of the co-op, and it's removing that 4-acre cap. So let's say you have a co-op and I don't know, you have like 20 licensees and they're all growing X amount of cannabis, but it removes that 4-acre cap, so the cooperative model, which is made up of a number of licensees, can compete with the large ag that maybe one company that has like 15 acres in production.
Okay, so what you're saying is regardless of the number of parcels involved, currently there's a cap of 4 acres that they collectively could be cultivating? Mm-hmm. Okay, so...
Or would be.
Under the current rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so by removing that cap, they could just essentially have an amalgamation of more parcels, more businesses, more licensees.
Exactly. So it allow the co-op model to compete with the big corporate ag.
Okay.
In terms of scale.
And then on the last bullet point with the GMO status, County Council, have you reviewed that statement? I don't know.
The statement here is what you're asking about?
Yeah, the very last bullet point.
So I
says
know
regardless.
We're in the process of reviewing the GMO, actually quite a while ago. So we're actually reviewing the prior county council opinions on that, so that we are consistent in our approach. But I know we haven't completed that task.
Okay, I just wondered because I know we discussed that at our last board meeting. Let's take a look at our ordinance, what cases have happened throughout the nation, legal cases.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to open it now for public comment. Please come forward, state your name for the record, and know you have 3 minutes.
But I do have some other comments as well. In the overview, first couple of pages that were published with this document, and on the second page where we have a pie chart with agricultural values, I'm wondering if the county can break out cannabis as its agricultural value or where it fits into this pie chart. I know that we have had SIPCA on board for a track and trace. We have had no public reporting from them to know what in the world they have found in data to analyze the cannabis industry, but I know the public has requested a SIPCA report on that issue. I think it's very important that we start including cannabis as an agricultural contributor. The other thing that I'm concerned about is that on page 9, it's the last bullet point, and it has to do with advocating for local track and trace programs. I think that it's been demonstrated and commented on many, many times that we have no viability of a current local track and trace program outside the county, and that indeed it is more of a burden than it is an asset. I've asked for the contract with SIPCA. I've been denied because of redaction. Anything that has to do with the monetary payments by the county to SIPCA. I know that the Board of Supervisors, supported by the CEO, have indicated that cultivators in the county should not be subject to more than one track and trace system. It's redundant and it's difficult. We all know who have been participating that SIPCA has been difficult to use, not always functional, et cetera. So I'd like you to strike that recommendation. I think it might be good on page 16, right under disaster recovery, to add where it says in red, incomprehensible in October 2017, referring to fires, that we should add 2018. And I think that because there are so many implications of PG&E stopping power if there's an impending fire or disaster of some kind, there's something in here about garage doors being openable even if there's a power outage. I think it brings to light again that Mendocino County needs to be very flexible in the way that we structure generator use so that we don't have problems if some unforeseen disaster occurs and we need power. And other than that, the GMO situation, to answer your question, and I hope you give me a few more seconds here, the concern to most people in conscientious organic agriculture is that the original GMO status was specifically defined, and Measure H back in '04 was specifically defined as to what was happening then. Now we have a variety of processes that manipulate genetic material in plants, and we want them to be all-inclusive. When we say GMO standard, we want it to include some of these newer versions of genetic manipulations. Thank you.
Anyone else? Please come forward, state your name for the record.
Hello, my name is Tekla Brose. I'm from Covelo, and I'd like to thank you all for your work. I know you're working really hard. I have a couple of comments. Tekla, T-E-K-L-A. Okay, so I had one comment about the PG&E fire situation. I did not read the regulations you're proposing, so I don't know what the full language is, but I do think that given the new world we live in of imminent fire all summer, that PG&E is, I think they need to be forced to do more inspection of their infrastructure. And I think the counties need to do that just in self-defense, because it's not enough. Obviously, the campfire is clearly, it was not enough. Second thing, I would like to ask that the final adoption of the cannabis regulations be delayed until the new board is seated, because I and many other people in Covelo do not feel that we are adequately represented by the current appointed member. And we would feel much better if it was delayed until we were actually having an elected representative on the board voting and making changes. Third thing, I'd like to support the non-GMO. Gene editing is the form of genetic modification being used by this company that wants to move into Covelo. And gene editing is, in Europe, classified as a genetically modified species. The last thing I'd like to talk about is the 600-foot exclusion from schools and churches. When the overlays were approved a couple weeks ago, sort of ninjaed in at the last moment was keeping the 1,000-foot exclusion, which pretty much knocks out most of Covelo. So it's like you might as well not have done the overlay. We had hoped that there would be a 600-foot in line with the state regulations for maybe just for Covelo or for other small towns that are so small that churches and schools, the whole area. So we would like to ask very heartily that the 600-foot exclusion be what is in place with the overlays. Okay. Thank you.
Sir?
Yes, my name is Chris O'Bergen, and I'd like to comment on the generator issue. I'm currently in the process of subdividing a piece of property. I'm bringing in power, PG&Es, cut the trees away, bringing in lines. And in deciding what to do for whoever the future owner of these properties may be, there's a couple houses in the Class K program. So I'm having to make real serious decisions about how much capacity do I need to provide for a generator to be able to operate if PG&E decides to cut the power off at a given time. So there are those of us who are not directly involved in that, but are making financial decisions based on what we think is going to be the regulation in the future, that we really need to have some clarity on what's going to happen with generator regulations. It's not always so-called bad people out there with huge generators. It's just knowing what electrical infrastructure to provide for someone who may be putting a property into the program in the future, that we need some kind of idea of what you're going to allow and what you're not going to allow. And with the news from PG&E that they're going to be cutting people off, it becomes more important for us to be able to put in a little bit bigger generators or capacity for them in case the person will need that in the future as a selling point on a piece of property. So we need clarity on what the county is going to offer, because we're designing things for people that may be trying to max out your capacity of what you're going to allow us. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So when you say PG&E is talking about shutting people off, are you
rolling blackouts?
Rolling blackouts, so not permanently shutting them off. Yeah.
Not permanently shut them off, rolling blackouts, but there are people with mission critical electrical systems who need to have electricity. So they need to have big enough generators to run whatever their operation is when that rolling blackout hits, just like a hospital does, just like wineries do with their operations.
And homeowners that have medical issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. My mother just went through that, so thank you very much.
And I'd just like to say in response to some of the comment about the agricultural values, we don't have enough data right now, and we need verified data. Every ag producer is sent a survey that they must return it to the ag commissioner. Then they go out and also verify that information. So I believe, there just isn't that right now, because the industry coming out of the dark is so new that it wouldn't be verified information. Sarah?
Just to expand on that, within this report, as well as our budget book, all of the agricultural information is from our crop report. Right now, cannabis isn't included in the crop report.
Right.
But I believe that the commissioner and the program is looking at like a companion type document to kind of report similar information for cannabis. So I think that's forthcoming, but the reason it's not on this was this is the data from the crop report that
Exactly.
just came out.
Right, but it has to
So,
be
yeah.
verified data. You know, it has to be tied to something, like the shipment of pears, along with the tonnage that has gone to the wineries. All of that is verifiable, and the producers actually are surveyed by the ag commissioner and have to give all that data. So it's, you know, I think that's a
More to
good
come.
reason, yeah, that it hasn't appeared yet.
Okay.
But there's also a reason, which I mentioned at the board meeting. We had an ag commissioner fired for including, back in the day, it was marijuana in his ag report. So it was late 70s, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why people kind of laughed. But yeah, it was a big to-do, and the public was very upset. We live in a different world today with different regulations. But with the track and trace and all the verified data, we just probably don't have it as yet because it's so new.
Yeah.
So that's one of the points. And then also on the rolling blackouts and all, I don't think anything has been finalized. And in fact, there's a California Public Utility Commission meeting that will take place in Santa Rosa. Is it at the Veterans Hall in Santa Rosa? Or?
I
I think
it
it's
is.
I'm not
Veterans
sure.
Hall, which is located
Okay.
close to their fairgrounds, and that would be Monday morning, or Friday morning, excuse me, on the 15th. And it's usually the PUC is weighing in,
Yeah.
and there's also legislators that are weighing in, and that's legislation in Sacramento. I've gone over when they had the conference committee to listen to what they had to say. So I think it's still up in the air and a very mixed bag. So like all of you come in here, that puts a responsibility on us to go there,
Yeah.
wherever they're meeting. And the PUC is going to have a lot to say. But as Supervisor Jurdy said, that Supervisor Hopkins, many of us are looking at what the regulation is going to be. You've got many people that can't get internet, so to speak, to know when these blackouts are coming,
Yeah.
and have no idea. Some of them don't even have cell phone service in some of the areas in our rural counties. So it's important that we engage as well, but we just don't know what that's going to be. Churches, they were deleted. I mean, the draft.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow will
For December 11th will be the board meeting. and
requested to be deleted.
Yes, it's in the proposed red line for
when we
tomorrow's
went,
board.
excuse me, when we went through it the other day, last Tuesday. But that is something that we've looked at, and it is not in the state regulations, and a majority of supervisors felt that was unfair to cannabis growers to keep church in. But I don't know, you'll have to look at tomorrow's proposal. Yeah. And in fact, I believe you could even do that shortly. They have the agenda books in the executive office. There's a place to sit, and you could look at what's being proposed for tomorrow. And then I guess that was my last point. I hope I answered questions.
May I make one clarification on what I was saying?
Yes, sir.
What I'm particularly concerned about is the cannabis industry in particular tends to have more punitive regulations than other industries because they're the bad guys. in this case, I'm simply looking at trying to provide infrastructure that will allow these people to operate their businesses. As I'm making these decisions, that will affect how easily they can have a backup like a hospital has, or like something else has, that allows them to maintain their operation during a blackout. Because people are becoming concerned about this as they're watching PG&E, and they did do some mandatory blackouts.
But my point is, we're all in the
We're all
same
in.
boat.
Okay.
Because we have cattle,
Yeah.
and we need watering troughs. And if they aren't on a wind machine out in the middle of someplace,
Yeah.
you're going to need,
Gotta have power.
electricity to run those. It's the same, a farmer with a pump
Yes.
that has to do frost protection. And so we're all in the same boat. Elderly people that are very, that are on oxygen and other needs with illnesses, they're very concerned. So, yeah, it's kind of,
So if I could just add my 2 cents into this, because I was in jury selection last Tuesday, not here during that discussion, but the issue that I was raising about the diesel generators came from a Department of Transportation concern that county roads in general are getting much more wear and tear than they were, say, 20 years ago, in part due to UPS delivery trucks, everybody shopping online,
Yeah.
and the other is, in particular, their concern is the heavy weight of diesel trucks going up and down county roads.
Water trucks.
And water trucks. Most of those roads are just either gravel roads, or they're formerly gravel roads that have a thin chip seal over them and weren't intended for heavy delivery trucks. And so the concern is that that's wearing out. You probably intuitively know this if you don't know this statistically, but we have like the worst roads in the state of California. Of all the counties in California, I don't think there's a single, there's maybe one county that has worse roads than ours on a
Trucks were telling me that.
pavement condition index. And
Amador.
Amador probably still has the worst, but we have the second worst. It's hardly a badge of honor.
It's not
So,
honor.
so the thing is, if we know that they're getting extra wear and tear, we don't want to be encouraging that. And so,
Absolutely.
so I think one way of addressing that would be to say, well, I know obviously some people are accessing off of private roads. They're not driving miles and miles on county roads to get to their property. Maybe it's access of a state highway, then a private driveway or private road to get to a site. That would have no impact on the county road system. But where someone's driving, or these delivery trucks are driving on county roads that weren't intended for these heavy delivery trucks, it's like we're helping one person but hurting the community as a whole. So I think that's where my concern is not putting additional wear and tear on the county roads.
So you're differentiating between full-time use of a generator and a backup generator.
And if I can just clarify, so the language in here specifically addresses the state regulations and how they treat generators for cannabis.
Yeah.
And really trying to address those issues, but there are 2 separate regulations. There's county standards for your permit within the county, and then this, what we're talking about right here, is addressing some of the generator issues around small cultivators who aren't addressing the state regulations. So I just want to clarify that there's 2 sets. And this one particular is addressing the state regulations, and based on board direction from November, conversation about changes to any generator requirements within the county's jurisdiction will happen in 2019.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And ladies, do you have, this gentleman kind of took over the meeting here, I let him. Do you have any other comment that you can make? Corinne? Please restate your name for the record.
Corinne Powell from Ukiah. I don't want us to get hung up with diesel only, as that is not certainly the only power source. Gas generators are also used. And I can say from personal experience that on Ore Springs Road, the road went to hell in a handbasket after last season's logging trucks were using it. So there are plenty of things besides a potential cannabis cultivation area on or adjacent to a roadway that are problematic. So I don't want just, one stigma associated with things that might be used by a cultivator. Thank you.
Ma'am?
Thank you. My name is Tekla Brose. I just wanted to, I forgot to say that many people I've talked to in Covelo are in full support of these modifications to the rigs.
Okay, thank you. All righty. Any more comment?
As the state requirements working group recommendations stand, would you like those incorporated into the ledge platform that goes before the full board?
Well, I think we're hearing that county staff that's reviewed it is comfortable with it. So that's comforting to me, I guess.
Exactly. We just... golly gee, really quick.
This is Corinne Powell from Ukiah. This is a semantic issue, but I don't want it to in any way become exclusionary. And Sarah and I had talked about it at the last state working group meeting, and that was to change the wording on bullet point number 3 from the bottom that says...
Are you talking about the revised
the revised legislative?
Okay.
That we would state 10,000 square feet or less instead of less than 10,000 square feet. As some gardens are right there at the full quotient. So I just wanted that to be clear. We would like it to say 10,000 square feet or less. We
Okay.
did talk about it, right?
Almost all.
Okay, so that makes sense. It's consistent with our ordinance.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, other business? Do we have public expression from anyone for agenda items not on the agenda? Announcements. Announcement I have to make tomorrow is devoted to cannabis regulation. So hope you can all make it. And then any matters from staff?
Yes, Sarah Duquette, Executive Office. So this will go ahead and we'll make the changes from today. We're planning to come back the second meeting in January before the full board from adoption. We'll also have Paul Yoder and Karen Lang from our lobbyists in Sacramento to provide you guys with an update from the close of last session, what's coming up on the horizon this session, and what are the changes with the new administration means, et cetera, et cetera. So that will be a really great state and federal update from Paul Yoder, and then, of course, the Ledge platform.
Okay.
Chair Brown,
Ms.
just
Angela.
one comment since we talked about tomorrow's meeting that has been called for cannabis, that we do anticipate that that will be a shorter than usual meeting since the topic is only cannabis and there's 2 topics, both being cannabis. So we anticipate that sometime around lunchtime that meeting will be over. So if there is anybody here that plans on coming in for public comment, the morning would be the better time.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
And actually, I did have one more. I just couldn't read my own notes. To say to you, ma'am, that there are several regulations or additions, amendments that will have to wait until the new year. And that's also in the staff report that you'll read for the agenda items. So there are several that will go on because of CEQA requirements and more background research. So the new supervisors coming in, it will be heard in front of them. So I just wanted you to know that. All righty, we're adjourned.